afternoon and welcome to Cyberfest 20, the North East's biggest cybersecurity festival. My name is Phil Jackman and I lead on Cyber North, the region's cybersecurity cluster, developed by Dynamo Northeast and supported by Accenture and the Innovation Super Network. We're working to position the region as a great place to deliver cybersecurity services. Cyberfest, now in its third year, shows the breadth of talent that the industry has in the region and also the wide and often complicated facets that contribute to cybersecurity. This is the fourth of 10 events that we have this September. It's focused on the role that cybersecurity plays in keeping our health data safe. If you'd like to raise a question, please then can you do so using the Q&A button below, and I'll try and get through as many as we can. Those that we can't, we'll write to you with an answer. I'd now like to introduce to you my colleague Andrew, who's chairing today's event. Thank you.
Great, thanks Phil. Hi everyone, I'm Andrew Besford. I'm a non-exec on the board of Northumbria Healthcare, which is an NHS Foundation trust in the region, and I've been working with Dynamo for about 2 years. And before that, I worked in central government, and my early career was actually in the telecoms industry. But we're here today to talk about, there's really sort of two things going on in the Dynamo world that have that are starting to overlap. So Phil's been running Cyberfest for a couple of years now, looking at encouraging people into the security industry and building a community of the people who are working on that in the region, and really getting people from outside that industry focused on security. And we're doing a load of work around Dynamo now on setting up a cluster around the health tech capability that's in the region, and that's sort of following a model that's worked really well for us in other industries. So how can we grow the Northeast tech economy, but with a particular focus on health tech? And that's about helping providers in the region improve their use of technology, and also they're really keen to buy locally. So how can we achieve Dynamo's mission around the Northeast tech economy, but also improve outcomes for patients in health in the region? So I think that's something that's been really interesting. As we've seen that come up, we've seen this overlap between the cybersecurity focus and the health focus. So that's why we wanted to hold this event, and it's really the first one that we've done like this. So I think cybersecurity is a really important theme. So boards are taking an interest in this now. They are getting really concerned about what we sort of generically call cybersecurity. And I think there's a real question in health around how to navigate that, how to build digital resilience, and obviously goes without saying we're in a really challenging time. So today's really about bringing together a bit of a community around this. I think we're really seeing today as a starting point for everyone that's involved. So it would be great if you'd like to be part of that, to get in touch with Emma Whittenstall is the name at Dynamo, who is going to help bring everyone together around that. And there's still time to shape what we're working on and get involved if you'd like to. So hopefully Emma will be able to pop up and say hello so that you can have a chat with her if you'd like to. Today, it won't have escaped everyone's attention, bringing a bunch of security people into a conversation like this, that you're not in a secure environment. So I'd just ask if we could follow some Chatham House rules around the conversation we're having. And certainly I've found that it's absolutely not a barrier in the kind of conversations that we're having around being able to share and help each other. So really looking forward to that. And we've got some great speakers today. So I'm going to suggest now that I get each of them to say a little bit about their organisation and what their role is, and just to give you a sense of who's here, and then we'll get into a conversation. So the first person I'd like to introduce is Abby Dakin, and Abby looks after cyber assurance across local authority and health in Leeds. So Abby, could you say a little bit about what's involved there?
Hi everybody. Yeah, I missed the back end of Andrew's introduction there. So I do work across local authority, that's all I heard, and also in health. So I am responsible for cyber assurance and compliance across Leeds City Council, which has approximately 11,500 users, the CCG, just 350, and all 102 GP surgery sites in Leeds. That's around about 3,500 users in that sphere. So it's quite a big estate, and it's a fair amount of responsibility.
Brilliant, thanks for joining us today. Next up, we've got Tony Burgess, who's Head of Technology Operations at NHS BSA, so that's NHS Business Services Authority, which is based in Newcastle, and hopefully Tony will be popping up now to finish my sentence. There we go. Hi, Tony. We need to unmute you, Tony, sorry.
Yes, I'm on mute. A regular mistake I make at our meetings. So yeah, thanks, Andrew. So yeah, I'm Tony Burgess. I'm currently head of technology operations for the Business Services Authority. I've got cyber operations under my remit, so I'm responsible for our cyber operations strategy. So it looks at how we operate both internally and externally across the health sector. We provide a range of services to, if you like, from cradle to grave, it's been often described within our organisation. So there's a lot of information we hold. There's a lot of services we provide. We are, like a lot of organisations, embarking on a digitisation programme. So yes, we have a lot of challenging times ahead and a lot of interesting times as well in the cyber arena.
And one of the things that I think is really interesting about Business Services Authority is that it's one of the few really central bits of the health system that's plugged into all the different organisations around the country, and it's headquartered in Newcastle. So it's good that we've got that skill base and that sort of decision making in the Northeast. And finally, we've got Richard Holmes. So Richard works for CGI and runs the UK cybersecurity team. So Richard, could you tell us a bit about CGI and your role?
Good afternoon. So yeah, Richard Holmes. I run CGI's UK cyber team. CGI have got about 5,500 people in the UK. We provide IT services across a broad range of sectors. So about half of our work in the UK is with government, whether it be central government, local government, defence, health. And then the other half is in the commercial sector, but often in sectors such as energy, utilities, telecoms, banking. All sectors often with quite high requirements around cybersecurity. My team works as a sort of horizontal team, if you will, providing services across all of that. We're UK based, and because of the broad range of work the company does, often we're providing cyber in the context of the other work that the company's doing. We've got quite a balanced portfolio of services we provide, whether it be helping clients look at their maturity assessment against particular frameworks, designing particular controls, systems engineering, security lifecycle work, or operational monitoring, penetration testing and the like.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that, and thanks everyone for joining us today. So it's great that we've got such an interesting group of people assembled, and as I said, we're really hoping to build a bit of a community off the back of this. So I'd really encourage everyone that's online to feel free to ask questions, comment, say hello. I'll try and keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A as we go through. But I guess, you know, something that I was really interested to do to sort of start the conversation off while people think about what questions they'd like to ask is really just for each of you to say a little bit about what are the biggest risks to your organisation at the moment, what are the things that you're most worried about, and maybe as part of that touch on a little bit of, you know, maybe some of the kind of new things that you've been thinking about, like whether that's maybe a kind of working from home kind of shift, or some of the recent things we've been doing, or some of those things that are just always there, like the kind of treatment of personal data and all of those things that are always important to us. So Abby, could I ask you to start on that?
Okay. Well, yeah, COVID's brought us some challenges across GP land, as we like to call it. I don't know how many of our attendees work with GPs. The majority of our GPs were not enabled to work from home beginning of COVID. So that was our first 6 to 8 weeks worth of work, getting those GPs enabled at home so that they could protect themselves and their communities and continue to work. For the council itself, again, similarly, they were able to shift very quickly, in fact overnight, to support remote working for 11,000 users. So that's an enormous difference really of the capabilities of the two organisations to maintain and allow people to work remotely. I know a lot of councils still haven't managed to fix that issue, so certainly Leeds was a little bit ahead of the game on that one. What COVID brought was a lot of silly requests for bits of technology that we wouldn't necessarily support. So the use of WhatsApp, the NHS didn't help much with the first piece of communication they put out about relaxing the rules around IG and security. So that allowed a lot of our health practitioners to work with things like WhatsApp. We did a fair study on allowing video conferencing And again, it does show that it's a bit of a postcode lottery as to what sort of service you end up with. My local GP surgeries didn't have a video conferencing solution. So that was something that was evident across the borders as to what sort of service you would get remotely. But yeah, a lot of relaxing of rules has occurred during COVID and hopefully will not continue. However, we're not quite at the end of that yet. So we have to leave those things in place to enable people to work. As far as new stuff outside COVID, again, COVID did bring Teams to the NHS very quickly. That's something the council's put in much more slowly, but not quite as robustly. So those two things don't quite marry yet. Teams and N365 or M365 if you're outside health. Those things are concerning, but also quite exciting. The use of OneDrive, should we allow our GPs or other practitioners to take their OneDrive with them? They already have their NHS mail account that goes with them if they move organisations. These are the things that are the quandaries, I suppose, at the moment, but not enormous questions, but they do have ramifications, as it's not always about patient identifiable data. It's around personal data. So if we comply with the law, then we must look at everything and try and protect it all. Oh yeah, but a few things from me.
Great, thank you. Can we move over to Tony? Maybe how does that look from maybe an organisation that's a bit more sort of centralised and a bit more sort of back office than that?
Yeah. So similar to Abby, one of the first things our organisation needed to do was to make people remote workers. I think before COVID, we had probably around about just less than 200 people throughout the country who were classified as home workers who had the capability to work remotely. That soon had to go to over 3,000. So you can imagine the challenges that presented the organisation from not just a security perspective, but a technology perspective. So, it was a case of what did we currently have. To make matters probably more complicated for the teams, we were right in the middle of a Windows 7 to Windows 10 migration program. We were also right in the middle of, well, not right in the middle, probably towards the end of migrating from a single supplier model to a multi-supplier, where we were bringing in new services, such as, again, one of the services that we brought in that did help was we brought in a new always-on remote access VPN solution. So when we did get our users set up working from home, obviously we knew they were securely connected to the corporate network, so that reduced a little bit of the headache for the security operations functions. So that was the internal challenge, and we're still dealing with that now, because one of the things the organisation made the decision was, if you could work from home, you would work from home to remain safe, to keep everybody safe, because that was the forefront of the chief exec's brief. And we're obviously setting people up now to become more flexible than they were previously. So we have less people in the office. We still have a large operational element which does processing of prescriptions, dental payments, etc. So that all happens behind the scenes to make sure these people get paid. So obviously that was a challenge as well, to keep those systems running with the support people being out of the office. And probably thirdly, one of the things we did as part of the COVID response is we were asked to stand up a lot of services on behalf of the NHS. So obviously the chief exec and the leadership team helped the NHS with a range of services. It was how do we stand those services up quickly, because that was the goal, but also securely. Obviously the security operations team and the architects worked very closely with a number of different organisations to make sure that happened. And it's still happening now. So again, that's an ongoing challenge we see. As far as new stuff's concerned, the transition to new suppliers has already bought a range of new services. Some of what Abby mentions, Teams was something we had to look at. We had a number of different platforms. We had a bit of Skype, we had a bit of this. Teams was decided as being the corporate piece for allow people to communicate. So it was literally thrown over the fence. I'll use the word thrown over the fence to us to say we need to implement this. We didn't use the NHS digital central tenant for this. We created our own environment, which meant we could secure it quicker and we could be a bit more agile and more flexible in how we rolled it out. We rolled it out in, if you like, various stages. The first bit obviously was the video conferencing, to allow people to have conferencing and messaging. And then we're now in a process where we've settled down a little bit. We are looking at what does OneDrive mean moving forward. Not similar to the if you like, the doctor's analogy, but we still have people who move around the country, and it's like, how do they move around the country with the information securely? So, and I think a lot of our suppliers are being quite proactive in terms of what they're offering us to remain secure moving forward, as well as we digitize a lot of services.
So, Tony, what are some of the kind of what are some of the more traditional sort of cyber considerations at BSA? Because you've got all this prescription data and all of the electronic staff record and some of those kind of things as well.
So, well, the traditional cyber elements is the basics, making sure the the systems are secure, because they're hosting a number of different areas with different suppliers, making sure the suppliers have the necessary foundations in place from a governance point of view, and access controls, patching, and we run vulnerability management scans regularly on these systems to make sure they're secure as well. So it's really making sure the foundation's in place. A lot of the systems now are moving obviously to being accessed from anywhere, so it's making sure that people who are accessing them are allowed to access them. Role-based access controls, all the traditional stuff you kind of hear. Health checks, we obviously, before a system go live, we do IT health checks, both internal and external, just again to go back and make sure from an assurance point of view, as we sign systems off to be used, we make sure they are secure.
Mm-hmm. Bro, thanks for that. I'll move over to Richard. So thinking about your client base, what are the kind of what are the things they're most worried about, and what's that sort of mix of the kind of new world and sort of things that they're traditionally worried about?
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Well, so from my perspective, actually, in some ways, much of the same issues as Abby and Tony have mentioned. I mean, we work with a number of clients around remote access solutions. Obviously, some clients already had systems in place, at least for a sort of maybe needed scaling up slightly, but they basically had an architecture in place. Others had to start from scratch in some circumstances. And for me, often it was around, it's a business continuity thing. They had to shift to that extremely quickly. Many of them did consider security at the time, but there is a piece around going round the loop now. They might have put things in place that at the time they thought might be quite temporary, but actually might be in place for quite some time. So it's about going back round that loop and looking at the sort of risks and the use cases in the context of the new ways we're all working, to understand that and take the time to go back round and satisfy ourselves that we've got proportionate controls in place that are allowing us to work safely. So that's one piece around the sort of remote working. I mean, all organisations, I think, on cyber are generally they're on a journey, right? No one's claims to say, yeah, we're absolutely sorted on cybersecurity, and it's just about how far they are along that journey. And obviously, because the landscape changes and their business changes, they'll need to evolve as well, right? It's been disrupted a bit by COVID and the pandemic, but still that journey is ongoing. Typically, first things organisations are trying to get to grips with is maybe some sort of legacy debt, where achieving things like, I don't know, Cyber Essentials Plus, or what might be deemed to be, reasonably straightforward certifications. Well, if you're a big organisation, you've been around for a long time, maybe there's been organisational changes or mergers of other organisations, actually just knowing what you've got, right? And in some cases, you're pinned on old operating systems because you might have bespoke applications that aren't that easy to migrate. It can be quite a process to go through to get past that sort of legacy position, such that you're up to date. So that's one of the things organisations are generally involved in. Then there's migrations to new services, to the cloud, and understanding what that means. I mean, in general terms, cloud offers some advantages around security, but it's about understanding cloud services and making sure, I mean, as Tony said, that so one of the responsibilities as a user of cloud services is you've got to know who's accessing your cloud, right? And the whole configuration and setup of the architecture. You can do things the right way and the wrong way. So helping organisations get sorted on things like that. The one other thing, an overall thing I'd mention is lots of organisations are trying to do new things, right? And all of the benefits that can be had from some emerging technologies, whether it be data analytics, getting new types of data, maybe different types of devices producing data, and that whole journey to say, well, there's now maybe more data. Quite a lot of it often can be personal data. There might be more varieties of types of devices and generally more connectivity, and they're all things that sort of drive cybersecurity, such that it's increasingly important to make sure you've got a position and you know what you're doing. And I think if you can confidently do that, right, and you understand cyber in the context of what you're doing, you can actually go and embrace and move forward on some of those initiatives quickly. That's one of the benefits around things like cloud. It often allows you to move at pace.
So I guess there's quite a few things in there that I think it would be worth us coming back to just sort of explore a little, or maybe talk about what those mean to different organisations. But I think maybe, you know, one of the things I'm picking up on there is that we've been through this whole kind of forced experiment recently where, you know, we might have been experimenting with something to see if it was safe or that kind of thing, where we've suddenly in a matter of weeks done what would have taken months or even years before then. So there is that sense of kind of going back around and making sure that the things that we've put in place are still or as safe as we'd like them to be, if we'd maybe been able to do them in a bit more of a measured way. And I guess I was just keen to bring in Abby and Tony on that point as well, and thinking about, well, you know, some of the things that you've had to do recently and sort of responding to this sort of changing situation, or you know, there's sort of all different angles to it. Like Tony, you mentioned that you'd been working on multi-supplier and that was an interesting sort of part of the response to this. So I wonder if you could tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so on that, Andrew, we, like a lot of organisations, traditionally we had one supplier that did everything for us, who would provide networks, data centre, desktop devices, it just basically did everything, and included in that would be the security operation element, where we would, you know, you're paying for a service, so they would provide the service. We shifted, and we've been on this journey for 12 months now. We've shifted to having a different supplier to deliver the networks, to deliver the telephony, to deliver the data center infrastructure environment. But adding to that, we've also brought an element of services in-house. So we brought in the EUC service in-house within the BSA. It was a decision they took about 18, well, longer than that when the program started. And I have to admit, it was a decision that weren't sure whether it was actually the right decision or not. But I think one of the big advantages of our response to COVID is the fact that that has been an internal service. It's allowed us to be really flexible and really agile in what we do for people at home, how we get them home. We haven't had to go through an enormous change program with suppliers. We haven't had to have a whole load of governance in there. And come back to Abby's point, we probably have done some stuff in there with regards to the homework and getting the devices out that normally you would have took a bit more care about. You would have probably thought about this, but we were under pressure to get the devices home. But the multi-supplier models work really, really well when all our suppliers have come together around our security operations. So one of the things we set up really early is, before we brought these supplier on, was like a supplier security working group where we would bring them in as we were due to bring them on, because we didn't bring them all on at the same time. That was another challenge. Different suppliers were coming on at different times. We'd had the security output from what the procurement exercise had said they were going to deliver. So it was a case of working with them to understand what it is they bring to the security arena. And again, I think instead of having one supplier that's, you know, got their solutions, we've now got like 3 external suppliers plus an internal supplier who's also interested in what cyber security can bring to the future as well. So when we have these, if you like, working groups, we have initiative sessions as well, innovation session, what's going to be coming next. And these suppliers are keen to also utilize the services they've put in, because some of the services have gone in and they've gone in with a bare minimum to meet the contractual obligations. Now we're looking to work with them to say, right, okay, what other added benefit will that bring? In some cases, it might be that, you know, we've got 2 suppliers providing a similar product. It could be, can we consolidate on products to save money on a license perspective? Which product's more secure, or which provides a better business benefits? One of the things we have said as an organisation, we don't think we'll go back to traditionally how we were operating. We'll certainly not have 3,000 people going back into the office. So the fact that we've got the multi-supplier model allowing us to, stand up more remote access. We've leveraged cloud in a number of services. Come back to Richard's point. If you're using the cloud services, the main suppliers out there have made a massive investment in security. Once you start looking at what they're doing and how they operate, a few years ago, we're probably a lot more nervous than we are now, especially around the data I was mentioned before, the type of information held in healthcare. Certainly, I remember being at sessions 3 or 4 years ago where people just saying, no, it's an absolute no, we're not going cloud and this, that, and the other. Whereas I wouldn't say COVID's forced us to do that, but I think it's kind of opened people's eyes to what's out there. And a lot of the suppliers, certainly the suppliers that we've been dealing with, have been very proactive in their approach to that as well. So it's been really interesting. I'm really keen to see, we're now in the phase where we've gone from project into operational, and it sits very much under my remit, not just the cyber security element, but I'm very interested to see what's next. Because as we decide as an organisation what our new operating model will be, we'll rely on these suppliers to help us deliver that new operating model. And the relationships that we have with them, again, I think that's probably been one of the key things. Is we, from a security perspective, we're collaborating. It's not a case of like, your product's better than my product, etc., etc. It's about we're looking at what's right for the business, and obviously explaining that's the way forward, etc., etc. So it's been an interesting 6 months, Andrew. I have to say it's been quite enlightening, really, because I was a bit nervous about it's easier to deal with one supplier and one security operations people in front of you, one report to look at, and you know where to go if something goes wrong. Whereas you've got different suppliers as well. Sorry, it's not my fault, it's their fault over there. It's just about management all that as well. So
yeah. I was going to ask Abby about this as well, because I guess in your world, Abby, it's kind of even more convoluted in the sense that you've got the local authority with one set of suppliers and the health system, which has potentially got a different set of suppliers. And actually, there's a question from Alison Freer that's probably relevant to this as well, asking about the patient population. So what's how much have they started to trust remote consultations, and how much more opportunity is there around doing virtual medicines, the way Alison's put it, more securely in the future?
So I actually hold a clinical safety role, even though I'm not a clinician, which I'm sure happens an awful lot across the health system. So we did a risk assessment around video conferencing and how that could have clinical impacts on the patient themselves, and the risk versus the benefit was evident in a pandemic. It was a fairly simple decision to make, and yet the feedback that we do get from GPs is that there are swings and roundabouts. I think that's probably positives and negatives. The freedom to keep their staff safe, and maybe people don't necessarily have an understanding of a GP practice. So within Leeds, we do have a practice that's got 120 people, right down to really small ones that have a couple of doctors and a couple of admin staff. And then there's all the other services that run from GP surgery. So you have the any variable supplier, AQRs, are they? I always forget this acronym, where it could be a physiotherapist or another service that's being delivered, or an optician may occupy the same space. And equally, those people could be vulnerable to the virus. And when you're trying to enable your business to run, as they are all small businesses, it's a case of enabling that, but also continuing your duty of care and the do no harm premise as well. So they have themselves the potential to be vulnerable when they're treating people that are poorly. They've got possibly an older generation of support staff that need to protect themselves and take telephone calls from the public, direct those calls themselves, or they could even have practice managers that have to do all the behind the scenes work to enable that GP surgery and all the data to be processed, etc. The other thing that people maybe forget is that the primary care system data is controlled by the GPs. So when all of these studies up front were trying to find out who is vulnerable, all that data had to come from GP systems, but also from the referral systems. So when they were looking at the rheumatoid data, they had to go to the rheumatoid referral system. And again, anyone that works within that NHS environment understands that there are hundreds and hundreds of these referral-based systems where the information doesn't always come back to the clinical system. So I suppose the question that's being asked there is how does a patient feel? I don't know. I can tell you how I feel. I can tell you how the GPs feel. But in terms of patient trust of that remote service, I think they're probably, as we're the great British public, very happy to have it. And I think an awful lot of people have worked very hard to ensure that the system does continue as best it can under these circumstances. I think we've had the instruction now to get back to normal by October in GP land, which is going to be interesting. One-way systems. Anyone that's been in a shop in the last sort of 3-4 months as they put in the one-way systems, and anyone that's been to a dentist, I certainly have this morning. I don't know if you can tell. The aerating.
Not many people have managed it yet, have they?
No, I've actually had a crown during COVID, so I think I've done really well. Yeah, no, it's horrible. But the aerating processes, the spirating processes, that are the ones that are actually causing the spread. So as we know now, it's an aerating disease. It spreads in the air. It's terrifying contagion. I mean, it's serious, obviously, but these procedures need to be done in small spaces that we can pass through individually. And so GPs are going to have to change the way that they work with that flow. So I think probably, depending upon which part of the population you are, whether you're young, old, consider yourself vulnerable, risk averse, risk excited, you may or may not find that this remote way of working is better. I think if I was to survey my friends, they like the fact that they can now book online consultations. They don't mind a telephone call where they don't need to be looked at. They're probably quite happy to have their prescriptions delivered. The improvements and the changes to the NHS app were pretty amazing and very fast. So well done to the NHS for that. Really early on, we were able to get access to our data on the app and online prescriptions too, which was fantastic and moved a lot of the pressure away from central services. So I suspect there are a lot of quite happy people, but then maybe some older, more vulnerable, more lonely people who aren't getting the service that they maybe need for their mental health. And there will be, as we already know, this is very depressing to say, unnecessary deaths as a result of people not being able to come in and see their GP. So,
well, I think, it just shows how many different angles there are to it, aren't there? And I think, thinking of another answer to Alison's question, one thing that we noticed in Northumberland and North Tyneside, and bear in mind that's so geographically quite a large patch, was that people were really appreciating not having to drive a long way to appointments. And we'd actually already started, well, two things had started pre-COVID. One was tracking how many miles patients were driving to get to their appointments. And another was we were starting to experiment with a remote consultation system. And so, we've been dipping our toe in that water and learning how to measure how many miles people are driving. In the month of July, I think we saved about 660,000 miles, which is quite a lot of miles being driven around Northumberland for people to go to outpatient appointments. And so I think a lot of patients really trusted that and really appreciated it. But then the flip side is there's times when you've just got to see a human being. And I'm not sure we've really found our way through that yet. So we've kind of swung all the way one way. And I think we're still finding this place back in the middle. And I guess that, thinking specifically from a kind of security point of view, I'd quite like to bring in a question from Fenwick Smith that's on the Q&A as well around sort of attempted compromises. What's it been like with the move to more Fenwick said remote working, but I'll take that to include sort of remote consultation as well, and that sort of increased attack surface. So I guess, Richard, could you maybe say what you've been seeing from your clients around that?
Yeah, I guess a couple of things I'd mention in that. I mean, one is in general, with people working remotely, we've all seen in the press like reports of like a big shift in phishing campaigns related to COVID. And that's really, it's not that there are more bad people out there, it's just they, in an agile way, have changed their tactics to sort of take hold of. I mean, phishing is all about tempting people to click on things that they shouldn't be clicking on, and that's about unfamiliarity, maybe urgency or concern. Those sorts of drivers might make you do something you otherwise would not do. So you know, there are lots of examples, and there's a significant, quite a significant shift in campaigns to sort of be COVID based to try and tempt people. Fortunately, it was quite largely reported in the press, and I think people quite quickly got to be savvy to that and took account of it. The other thing I would say is we definitely have seen some examples where adversaries have specifically targeted remote access connections for organisations, maybe relating to ransomware attacks, etc., to sort of gain a foothold and do attacks. So there have definitely been attacks related to sort of the changes in infrastructure that organisations have put in place.
Yeah, that was a password spraying attack, wasn't it? 1st of April, where the majority of healthcare organisations were hit by that password spraying attack. And then the follow-up from that, I think it was 3 or 4 weeks later, where those credentials could be seen on the dark web. I'm uniquely placed because my son works on the dark web. This is something that he does. So he scrapes that information, sometimes taps me on the shoulder. And one of the most entertaining things, which is also one of the most heartbreaking things about these COVID-based push through cyberspace and through the dark web especially, was that NHS passes were seen to be sold on the dark web just to get people into supermarkets for that extra hour early, which, you know, it's the very depths of humanity, isn't it? But I found that incredibly interesting, and also that the research facilities were being targeted, and also local authorities, as they were expected to have more accumulated data that was information as opposed to just data. So it'd been interpreted as people were fearful, and also what was it? Hydroxy, what's his face? Mr. Trump decided the bleach-based treatment.
Hydroxychloroquine.
That's the one. But there were dark web sales of that rocketed. So it's really interesting how the outside world, if you like, was reflected on the dark web and in that deep nastiness of the dark web itself.
I think it just goes to show, doesn't it, how quickly you have to respond to some of these things. Like NHS trusts all up and down the country are having to advise their staff to take their badges off when they left the building, in a way where, I mean, I guess having worked in government, I always find it a bit baffling that people do walk around with their badges on all the time, but loads of people go home with them, and they were actually getting sort of attacked on their way across the car park in some cases, which is just awful, isn't it?
It was interesting, actually, that the message came out very cleverly, I don't know, that there'd been a car crash and that someone had been injured by their pass, when the actual truth was people were being targeted for their NHS passes. So again, maybe don't spread that so widely, because I think they were quite careful with the message when they sent that out. Yeah.
And Tony, any view from BSA on sort of a different kind of attempts at compromises or taking advantage, or, you know, is it really kind of quite sort of phishing and sort of usual things?
Yeah, come back to Richard's point. We've seen an absolute spike in phishing attacks. We're like a lot of organisations. We use the NHS Mail, which is managed on our behalf by NHS Digital. They've seen a massive increase in attacks. What that led us to have to do is, because obviously people were at home, they weren't in the office. It was, how did we get the message out there that because these were a lot more sophisticated attacks than you'd seen previously. Or they appear to be, and you know, when people are at home, they've got lots of things going on. They've got kids looking after. They've got kids running around. They've got things going on. They might not take the same attention as they would in the office, and obviously they'd be in the office to get information. In the early days, we put regular updates out there about these. You know, be aware of this, be aware of that. And also we've seen on certainly on some of our machines at people's working from home, is we've seen an increase of malware getting through various systems. As part of our project with NHS Digital, we introduced the advanced threat protection on our devices. It hasn't been a massive spike, but we've certainly seen more machines over the last couple of months being affected. Luckily, the ATP works really, really well. I know NHS Digital get a centralised view across the piece of where that is. But certainly with the rollout to Windows 10, you know, the devices are automatically sort of taken off the network, etc., etc. We've seen some increase in traffic on a lot of our various websites and our services. A lot of it's just you know, scanning to see what's out there, to see if there's any vulnerabilities, etc., etc. But predominantly, certainly in the early days, it was all around phishing. I think people seen that as the quick win to get in. You know, they'd already had the information. It was just a different think it was a different mindset. People were in a different mindset as well. Not saying they weren't taking as much care, but they were certainly in a different mindset working from home.
Just to add to that, I think from the COVID perspective and using that COVID as the push. So we're all familiar with receiving phishing attacks 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, and actually WannaCry I think was actually at 4:30, wasn't it, on a Friday afternoon? Some of the things that we've seen in the local authority, and this will be across CCGs as well, any commissioning service will start to see an increase in invoice alteration requests. So when you get an email that says, can you change the bank details to this, please? And they are coming from, because people are moving more to the cloud, 365 accounts that don't have multi-factor authentication on. So 2 in the last week at the local authority where I work. One was specifically, you'll love this, one was from Greg's. So with COVID, one of the things that they've done with business rates is lower those rates. Makes sense. And they could claim back an amount due to COVID, a refund almost on the business rates. And Greg's, the sandwich shop, actually were compromised and put in a number of requests to have the bank details changed across the country, and a number of local authorities actually fell for it. So that was quite a serious one, hundreds of thousands of pounds on that one. And another was a care facility. So with COVID again, there have been increased payments for social care settings to provide care for COVID patients, or almost a risk-based payment. Here you go, here's an extra couple of £1,000 because the risk is increased to your staff. So those payments have increased. COVID subsidies almost out to those care systems and homes. So yeah, that was another one where it was a 365 that had been account that had been compromised, and it was the account of the manager of the care facility. So it was the right account for that instruction to come from. So what we've started to put in place across that social care setting is an initial password that needs to be used and quoted when any invoice details are changed. It seems a really simple thing to do, but if that data, that information is held within the contract and nowhere else, then it's much more, you keep your contracts surprisingly under greater lock and key than a lot of other stuff. So yeah, could be the right email account, but do they have the password with which to change the bank details?
Interesting you touched on that, because Fennick just asked a follow-up question online there about saying, are we considering using two-factor authentication to defend against phishing and other attempted compromise? So I don't know if you've been considering multi-factor authentication elsewhere, or I suppose that's like a second factor, isn't it? Having a password in the contract. I'll ask Tony and Richard as well in a moment.
Yeah, so for local authority compliance requirements, 2FA or MFA is a requirement of any cloud service. In order to get on a system for the local authority, you have to have two-factor in place. NHS systems aren't quite so stringent. NHS Mail does not insist on two-factor authentication, and neither at the moment does the NHS Teams instance. So absolutely, but it's not been something that we as an NHS organisation can push through, as we've taken up that NHS 365 provision. The council itself has a Teams proof of concept in place that still doesn't have MFA in place. It will by 3 o'clock Thursday. But it's essential for any cloud service to have that 2FA written into the contract, absolutely. And that is something that we've put in place at the council to have that detail ironed out, shall we say, as we already thought it was in place. Certainly with care homes, we should be communicating with them on an NHS Mail account. Those management accounts, which were other .org accounts, and seemingly more secure without being too insulting to a censure, then N365 should again have that 2FA on them to be deemed safe within the data handling elements of the contract. Absolutely.
I'm just going to suggest that, just conscious that we've not got that long left, there's something that I really wanted to touch on. So I wonder if we could move on from that a little and maybe talk a bit about skills, because I know that something Tony's mentioned before has been about growing your own skills, and there's a sort of link to that kind of multi-supplier. And I guess I'm particularly keen that we talk about the region as well in this. So, bearing in mind that Richard has a sort of national remit and Abby's in South Yorkshire, but kind of if we take a kind of quite a loose definition of the region here, what's it been like kind of finding the right people and growing your own skills and that kind of thing? I think maybe, shall I start with Tony on that?
Yeah. So I suppose I go back, I joined the BSA 16, 18 years ago, but in my current role, I've been in there now with 2.5 years. And we didn't actually have a cyber operations team at the time. We were heavily relying on the suppliers. And it was, we wanted to basically build our own. So we've recruited from the Northeast, predominantly, everybody who works in cyber operations there. We're a Newcastle office at the moment. And we have brought in a lot of younger people, I will say, in terms of into the cyber arena. Now, some of them have never had it. Their main interest wasn't in cyber until we brought them in as a kind of I wouldn't say an apprentice or an intern, but we have them as well, where we've moved them from the traditional technical role into the more interesting cyber role. But over the last 12 to 18 months, we actually have had 4 apprentices which have come through. So all 4 apprenticeships have come through, qualified, passed their apprenticeships, and they're now working full time. 2 are working in the security assurance role, probably similar to what Abby does in terms of our governance people. And we've got 2 in the technical arena. We had a first time in the cyber role last year. We took on an cyber intern, and we had some good candidates from actually Newcastle University, Northumbria University, and Middlesbrough as well. We were actually spoiled for choice. It was really, really surprised to see. We could have taken on half a dozen if we had the capability to support them. It was been so successful that they've now gone back to the university, but we wanted to maintain the link, so we actually have an agreement where they're going to continue with their education, but at the same time come and support the real world, if you like, working for us on a 1-day / 2-day a week basis. Now, because that was so successful last year, we've now engaged another intern, and we've just taken on another apprentice. So the team's gone from 0 to 8 within the cyber operations in 2 years. A couple of those people have actually come from other areas within the Northeast, other organisations who, if you like, cut their cyber operations, which meant it was ideal time for me when we're out looking for staff. We've predominantly trained them. We have a training program for them, as well as doing the ones who've done the apprenticeships. Obviously, we'll give them some technical training. We're very much, as an NHS organisation, ingrained with Microsoft, as I've mentioned previously, Windows 10. Obviously, we've got an Azure environment. We've trained, I think, nearly everybody in the security operations team in those areas, but also we've extended that out to the end user compute function as well. So we've got those guys who are traditionally technical, let's break and fix your machine, who have a security an interest as well. And it's proved to be working really, really well. Every time we've gone out to recruit and advertise, certainly in the security world, we've always been able to attract candidates. In other areas, we haven't been so successful. I don't know whether that's because of the other areas we've been looking at, but certainly in the cyber arena, we've been quite successful. It's something we want to continue to do, and we've committed to every year to be bringing in some apprentices. And again, I think some of them we've brought in benefited from, they weren't sure what they wanted to do, and certainly, it was like, well, I want to be in IT, but I don't know what I want to do. Once I've got into the cyber arena, there's so many different aspects of it, from a technical sort of, if you want to be like a ethical hacker, if you want to do some threat hunting, to do the governance, there's just so many different areas for them to explore. And it's very, well, obviously I'm going to say this, and it's a very interesting arena to be in. So I'm actively encouraging these young people to get involved with this stuff.
And presumably, Abby, is that kind of similar situation for you?
Nope, completely different. I think I had a job on getting training for myself, but maybe I started in a different field at a different time. So I've got a number of letters after my name now. But again, you don't actually need those qualifications. It's about an interest, as Tony was trying to say. Somebody that's really interested in it is much more valuable than someone that's necessarily qualified. But at the council, we have a security team. They're not a SOC. They just do network. And then we have security technical leads who, again, just do network. And it's coming from that very legacy environment where the boundary is the protection. but there's also a hell of a lot of tools. So we have people that are really skilled in using the tool sets, McAfee tool sets, IPS, again, loads and loads of networking kit that sits around and protects us from all sorts of stuff. Whereas over in the CCG field, that really is a legacy. And we have legacy people that were handed back from, or tupied back from Embed when Embed closed. If anyone remembers Embed, another one of these arms length type organizations to do the IT itself. And again, those people were not necessarily trained. So there's little old me, and I'm it. We do have security people that do security tasks, and we are pushing them through, or pushing them through is not the right word. They want to go and learn. So we've got the LGA, the local government organisation authority, have given us some funding to access the CISSP courses, the CISM courses. We have CBT, computers training, plural site, stuff like that, where you can do online courses. We encourage people to go and look at the free things. There isn't as much money for training in local authority as there is for in health. Now, health recently put out the HSISP course. So that was about, I've got that one. So that's about 5 years ago, maybe even 6 now. And those were made available. Last year, they were doing CISP courses. So again, NHS were paying for those courses for organisations to have qualified people to take those overarching multi-domain discipline type courses. But again, it's probably just as useful to have somebody who is really, really interested, who wants to learn and cares about doing it properly, so that they will not just put a patch on, they'll actually do the Kerberos update as well, as opposed to it's only my job to do the patch. That sort of stuff's really, really important. And yeah, the audit outside of that to make sure it's been done is essential. Tony will have big fat scanning tools, no doubt. We use a system called Rapid7 in the council, but the CCG doesn't have a scanning tool. So there's a really varied difference between the two domains, and certainly out in the GP land is a second step down in terms of maturity. So similarly, you have GPs that are really interested and care, and you have other GPs that really don't care and have no interest and would much rather talk to you about I don't know, medically, clinically things, as opposed to cyber stuff.
Understandable, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's really helpful when you do get a doctor that is interested in this stuff. So
yes, yeah, true. I'm just going to bring in Richard on the skills point, on the kind of recruiting and retaining people, and then I think we're only going to have time for one more question, which there's an interesting question on the Q&A that's come from Jack, so I'll ask that in a moment after Richard's been able to talk about the skills point.
Okay, well, I'll keep it brief. I guess from my perspective, I mean, one of the things actually Tony mentioned at the start is just the breadth of skills. So one of the positive things in a way about cyber is it's a broad church, requires a broad range of skills and specialisms. I think there's a need for us all to sort of be developing ourselves and our teams in terms of skills on an ongoing basis. I mean, whether it be the NHS Trust we're engaged with or other organisations in the North East, we do work with DWP, HMRC, some energy and utility providers. And I'd say there, organisations often, you know, there's some stuff when we engage that they say, well, we're sorted in these particular areas, right? And they choose to do some things in-house and manage the risk themselves, and that's great. But they will say, well, we've got a particular problem, whether it is they want external penetration testing, for example, or they feel their operational security team hasn't got the maturity they want, and they need some sort of third level support potentially that includes some knowledge transfer, or there's just some particular tactical project they're running on, I don't know, their actuary directive or something like that, where they're doing a change and they don't have the skills within their in-house team to do that. So they want to get some external engagement and then have a handover such that they then manage it through the life. You know, there's all sorts of ways, but I think all of the issues we've really talked about today in a way are underpinned by that need for skills across the piece.
And I think maybe one of the good news stories around that, and we'll probably see this in other sort of areas in the public sector as well, is that I guess there's a sort of heightened awareness of how important it all is now and how people are really kind of keen to play a part in it. And it's really a selling point that, you know, especially if you're into or would like to get into one of the various different aspects of security, then and possibly, as Tony said, maybe you don't even know what that could be till you dip your toe in the water. But if you'd like to get involved in it, then nowhere's really as interesting or as impactful as public service, and particularly health at the moment. So I think everyone's really had that brought home to them recently. So that's hopefully a good thing from a recruitment point of view and from people being excited about the work that they do, I guess. And I'm just going to ask this last question, and then I'll throw it open to see different reactions to it. But Jack's asked, how important do you think the human aspect of cybersecurity is in reducing cyber risk in your organisations? And so he doesn't mean just training, he means measuring, understanding, improving awareness, behaviour, culture about human-related risks. So we've touched on it a little bit in the phishing conversation that we had, but would anyone like to comment on that?
Very much so. Humans are humans. There are varying degrees of intelligence, interest, and motivation. So cybersecurity and the web around which you cushion your employees should be protective. We should never talk to them as if they've done something wrong. You do whatever you can technically to prevent an error from being made. And when they make an error, you pat them on the head nicely and explain what they could have done differently. Or, and actually more importantly, you change the technical control to prevent them or help them not make that mistake. The best security is psychologically proven to be the easiest to follow. So where we had, and again, I believe it's been changed recently, the NHS password policy.
I knew we'd get to password policy at some point in this.
The NHS password policy is the most convoluted, most ridiculous password policy ever written by a human. I'm assuming human. Could have been a machine, actually, couldn't it? With all its complexity, its length, and its actual nonsense in its demonstration, never to be remembered by a human person. Absolutely ridiculous. The NCSC password policy is much more simple. It's strength with length.
Follow that, everyone. I mean, that's
Absolutely.
I still hear kind of, you know, people that sort of purport to be experts in this talking about sort of mandating changing passwords every 30 days, and it's just not the guidance anymore, is it?
No, it's really not. You need a password manager. You help your people remember stuff, or they will write them down, or they will reuse them. It's really, really simple stuff. So I'm a great believer in do whatever you can technically to prevent people from making errors. Training aside, and even then, as I was saying before, if they're not interested in what you're trying to tell them, they won't remember it. It's as simple as that. So prevent them from making as many errors as you possibly can.
Anything from Tony or Richard? I guess, you know, something that I've kind of come across is sort of almost telling people, well, you know, if you had physical notes on somebody's, you know, if you had someone's medical records, you wouldn't just leave them there, would you? And you know, any clinician would say, well, I absolutely, you know, wouldn't do that if it was a physical record. But then, you know, people may be doing some of that with the kind of electronic equivalents. So.
I don't know. We have an actual written policy for home working prior to COVID where we had to put in a section about not leaving medical records on the parcel shelf in your car because someone had done it. So again, people are people. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, Tony.
No, just adding on to Abby, actually, people are people. And certainly in my experience, and you know, prior to joining the BSA, I worked in the fraud element where we obviously had, you know, interesting data, shall we say, that, you know, normally end up in a court of law, in trying to educate the users. I'm not talking training here, because obviously the training I spoke about earlier was normally for the you know, the security operation people, and it was about trying to educate them about the what if, you know, what happens if this gets out there, what happens if this gets out there. It was also, and you know, obviously the culture aspect's got to start from the top, and I think that's kind of what we've tried to do within the BSA. We've gone back to Abby's point as well. It's not a case of like, you know, let's bring you out and shoot you because you've done something wrong. We'll name and shame you. It's more about, right, okay, what is it you're not getting? What is it that, you know, we don't understand? And it's really, really important because, you know, they're all, you know, they keep often get said they're the weakest link, but quite often if you educate them properly and they've got the right awareness, you know, the controls are in place. They shouldn't need to see half the controls. They shouldn't be aware of them. It's about, you know, they could be a strongest link as well. And that's kind of pretty much what we've tried to do over the last few months when we've had these people at home. You know, obviously they're on their own, they're isolated. So we're trying to make sure that they, you know, they're not forgotten about, and we're actually trying to make sure that they're aware of what's going on. How do we keep them informed? You know, like a lot of organisations, we you know, NHS organisations, you're required to fill in a mandatory toolkit return every year where you have the annual training for people where people obviously got to go through the IG stuff. but it's a lot more than that. It's got to be about the awareness, and you know, the what if's a good story. And I think cyber has become more of a frontliner. If you think about what's just happened in Newcastle and Northumbria University the last week or so, you know, and also, you know, over the last few years, you keep hearing them time and time again, and we kind of use them as examples of, you know, we don't want to be like that if we can, if possibly help, but you can't protect yourself 100% of the time. But the human culture is really, really interesting.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to call time at that because we've run over a little bit, but I do think that was just so important to sort of mention that point about the sort of human aspect of it. So I think if people are able to stick around for a few minutes, then I think there's the chance to have a little bit of a chat now with anyone who'd like to do some informal networking. But I just think I should let Phil do a little bit of a wrap up now on the Cyberfest bit, and then maybe anyone who's able to stick around, we could maybe continue the conversation on that point in a moment. So hopefully Phil will now genie-like pop up and say goodbye to everyone, and thank you very much. Phil, I'm going to say it, I'm sure you will as well, and thank you so much to Abby and Tony and Richard for all of those thoughts, and thanks to everyone for coming. I really hope that people will sort of use this as a way to keep in touch and start to sort of build that community, because I do get the sense there's more that we can do to bring people together locally around these kind of themes.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and I'm probably going to repeat what you've just said, but what a fascinating...
Oh, sorry, in that case.
Right, these things are worth saying more than once, aren't they? And, so that's it for our fourth Cyberfest event for this season. And as I said, what a fascinating discussion. There are 6 more throughout the month, so please look out for them. The next one is this Thursday, which is a joint event with the North East Fraud Forum, so that should be exciting, and I hope to see you there. So having said that, as Andrew has just said, if you'd like to continue this conversation, just stay online. I think we're going to see how that runs for a little bit longer. There seems to be a lot of interest from the audience. I'd like to thank the speakers, Abby, Tony, Richard, and of course you, Andrew, for holding it together. CGI for the support of this event, and also the new health cluster that Dynamo has got up and running, as well as Dynamo Northeast, Accenture, and the Innovation Super Network. Also a huge thanks to Claire from Beacon House Event, who handles all the tech behind the scenes. And of course, thank you all for attending. Remember, September is Cyberfest. I'll see you all soon. Thanks,